All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. This is Warrior Woman 91, and welcome to this episode of the Renegade Millennials. Today, we have a sort of different kind of episode planned as far as subject matter, and I'm happy to have some new and returning guests today. Please welcome Jacob Airy of Conservative News and contributor to the Daily Wire, Harry Kachatrian, back after so many of you guys have been asking, and I'm doing a little bit of a Trump impression here, but so many of you guys have been asking to have Harry back, and we just finally wrangled him out of his Canadian gulag that he lives in, and he is back today, so everyone's happy. And I'm really excited to have you guys on today, especially because we have conservative film critic Christian Toto as our special guest at the bottom of the hour, so everyone should definitely stay tuned for that. It's going to be very exciting to have him on. And quick audience note, all death threats, memes, and marriage proposals should be directed to the comments section, so I'll be sure not to read them. And any questions you may have, please send to my Twitter account, @WarriorWoman91, and if we have time at the end, we'll try to answer them. So let's get started. So, as I said before, we're doing a little bit of a different episode today, talking about cultural things, movies, comic books, all that good stuff. So we're going to start with Harry. One of the biggest cultural changes that we're experiencing in the media is the cord-cutting phenomenon. Harry, can you tell us what you think the effect on the news media and traditional TV is going to have with this phenomenon of people, not watching it anymore, basically?
Sure. I think that for a long time, people have wanted to cut the cord simply because the way cable news is packaged, or the way cable TV is packaged, I think is sort of a scam in a sense that if there's like a specific number of channels that you really like that offer programming that you actually enjoy watching, you can't pick and choose what channels you want. You need to buy entire packages. So you're paying for like a few hundred channels, and really all you watch is maybe 4 or 3 different things. And even if, let's say, you specifically like watching Fox News, you can't only pay for Fox News. You have to also pay for CNN. And then conversely, if you don't even watch news, if you just watch AMC, you can't just pay for AMC. You have to pay for an entire cable news package or an entire cable package, which includes multiple news channels. So I think today with multiple internet services, becoming more popular and easier to use, it is becoming easier to access the entertainment that you like without paying for an entire cable subscription. So I think it's not quite at the point where everyone can do it. I think a lot of things like sports specifically are still a bit difficult. So the cable industry isn't in any huge danger at the moment, but it is, I think, getting better for people who don't want to pay for the subscription. So I think that this kind of paradigm shift in technology, coupled with the fact that news organizations are becoming particularly more partisan, I think is pushing a lot of people to sort of overlook some of the downsides of cord cutting and just sort of go all the way, even though it's still not as convenient as having your VIP cable package. I think some people are now willing to overlook these few shortcomings, simply given that a lot of news organizations like CNN, like ABC, are simply becoming obviously hyper-partisan. And which was, I think, if you followed the last election, it was quite obvious what how the landscape was divided.
Yeah, I was in DC watching CNN, heaven forbid, and it was like Hillary is the queen and Trump is Hitler all day long, 24/7. So it's very difficult to miss that partisanship.
I'm not quite sure how it works in the States. I can tell you in Canada, so if you want a cable package in Canada, the way it would sort of work is you can buy a basic package. This would run you about, I think, $30 Canadian dollars a month, which is about 45 to 50 US. And this would get you, I think, maybe 20 channels, the sort of basic channels. And this would include the CBC, which is the Canadian kind of government news. But the American stuff you wouldn't get with this. If you want CNN, you have to upgrade to like a VIP package. This is, I think, around 40 to 50 Canadian, or about 60 US. But this still wouldn't get you Fox News. and MSNBC. This way you would have CNN. If you want to watch Fox News in Canada, you have to buy an additional news package, which on top of your VIP package is about, I think, eight Canadian dollars, about 12 US dollars. So yeah, I guess I don't know how the pricing is in the States, but at least in Canada, there's no real way, as I said, to pick and choose channels you actually like. You have to pay for an entire, I guess, array of channels, a lot of which it's not that you don't even watch them. You just really disagree with the messaging on their channels, but there's no way to not give them money. So yeah, I think as it becomes easier to actually cut to get this stuff on the internet, I think we will see a lot more people cutting the cord.
Yeah, I speak as somebody who has not had TV since 2008, I think, or 2009. So I don't even know what the going rate is in the U.S. anymore. Maybe Jacob can fill us in on that in a little bit. But do you find that this trend is happening among the younger generation, or are there other generation that are also starting to cut the cord? That's for Harry.
Yeah, I think people in the older generation are catching up. I think it's definitely more prevalent in the younger generation. Like, I know a lot of people around my age who, I mean, it's obviously not the best sample size for a broad sort of sampling, or I don't want to generalize, but I do know a lot of people who are around my age who basically they pay $8 a month for Netflix, and they sort of get by on what they can find on the internet, without having to pay the cable company about $50 every month.
So fueling the cord-cutting phenomenon is obviously the national distrust for mainstream news outlets. What are TV stations and traditional news outlets going to have to do in order to remain competitive? Do you think they're going to end up dying out?
I don't think they'll die. Like, I don't think CNN is going to die out. I think they'll lose money, and I think that somewhere down the chain of command, the executives will definitely have to, because at the end of the day, what matters to them more than anything is their bottom line, is their balance sheet at the end of the month. So I think at the end of the day, they will make changes. They will obviously adjust. Maybe they'll fire a host, bring on a new anchor, but there won't be a significant shift, I think, in how in the way they lean. Like, I think they'll definitely do their best to make it less obvious. There's really no way to suggest that leak with the Donna Brazile situation, where it was found that Donna Brazile had given debate questions to Hillary Clinton, before the debate. There's no way that looked good for CNN. Right. There's no way that they want this stuff to be known. So yeah, obviously, they will work harder to sort of make their biases less known, but they're not going to be hiring like Mark Levin to host a show on CNN every time.
Yeah.
So I think they will. As cord cutting get worse, I think like CNN will do a better job perhaps at masking their biases, but they definitely won't they won't work towards getting rid of them.
Yeah, I think it was Stephen Crowder who was talking about how MSNBC is now starting to hire some perhaps not conservative voices, but certainly less liberal voices in order to balance out their channel a little bit, because statistics are showing that Generation Z coming up is actually one of the most conservative generations that has come about in quite some time. The very, very, very young. So they're going to have these companies are going to have to respond to the market changes and to what people want, because less and less of the younger generation is now wanting to take part in the Berkeley screaming riot craziness that has been the highlight of the millennial generation.
The New York Times, right? They recently hired Bret Stephens as well.
Right.
I think NBC picked up Megyn Kelly.
Yeah, those are two great examples of, again, not necessarily Tea Party conservative people, but certainly less Hillary Clinton worshipers, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's encouraging to see, especially even on the commentary end, which obviously, there's a distinction between news reporters and commentators. I think it would be good to see CNN, have full-time commentators who do lean right. Like they have, people like Sally Cohn right now. It would be, I think, it would be to their favor to hire people who are on the other end of the spectrum on the commentary side.
Definitely. Okay, so Jacob wrote this excellent article. We're going to kind of segue into more of the movie comic book type of discussion. There's been a lot of political messaging, obviously, throughout this whole election in movies and TV shows and comic books. And now Jacob wrote an article on Conservative News talking about some anti-Semitic messaging that was found in an Xmen comic. And I especially want to bring this conversation to talk about how the left in particularly, they like to target young people. They like to target, it's like 35 and under is the age group for them that they really want to target. So Jacob, why don't you just tell us what exactly was found in this Xmen comic that was found so offensive?
So I have it right here. Actually, sadly, I was not the first conservative to report on it, but Newsbusters actually had the scoop. And as soon as I read it, I told my managing editor, I was like, dude, we got to jump on this. And so there's a comic book store a block away. I just ran down there and picked it up. But on this page alone, like there's 4 or 5 messages. Like this character here, you know her as, if you watched any of the X-Men movies, this is Kitty Pryde, also known as Shadowcat. She's Jewish. Now, the movies don't really talk about this, but she's Jewish, and she's an Orthodox Jew in the comics. And right next to her, I don't know if you can see it on there, but she's standing next to a jewelry store. The most obvious sign, the only place that's not obscured is where it says Jew. And I honestly think if he had not put this, people wouldn't have noticed. But the 212 is also refers to the date when the first ever Christian did in Papua New Guinea. This number 51 pops around a lot. I'll get more on that in a minute. But one thing that I thought was kind of funny was this guy right here, this blonde guy, he's standing obscuring the sign that says "We support our troops." Now, the guy who did this, Adrian Ardian CF, he's been known to put messages in comic books before, but they've never been like overtly political. So this is kind of the first time. Can you see Colossus's shirt here?
Yeah.
All right.
Somewhat.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the message where this is a Quran. It's from Quran Surah 51, and it says basically I'm probably paraphrasing a little bit, but it basically says Muslims shall not suffer Jews or Christians to lead them. And so this is a very huge slap in the face to this Christian minority that's in Indonesia. Obviously, the 212 that you saw, that one was, what was the word Michael Knowles used? Esoteric. It was, but it just, that referred to the date of when he was elected, which was December 2nd. And the protesters who opposed his election painted that number in English at their protest against him. I don't know. I guess that's a picket sign, but anyway. So yeah, it's Marvel has been putting messages in their comic books since the 90s. I've been collecting Spider-Man comic books since the 90s. I actually stopped for a while and only collected Batman because they killed off one of my favorite characters, but I've started to get back into it. Just kind of a subtle protest. I'm not going to give them my money when they're killing off my favorite characters. But anyway, so yeah, they've been doing that for years. They had a line called Ultimate Now, in the mainstream, this is a mainstream universe issue. The mainstream wasn't so obvious. They had another alternate universe called the Ultimate Comics, which is they're no longer publishing. That one was even more obvious. Like the social messaging in the Ultimate comic books was ridiculous. So, it's just, it's been a problem there for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so what was any remedial action taken against the author or illustrator? Because some of that stuff, like specifically the Quran reference there, what Wasn't there a further reference that was very anti-Jew, anti-Christian as well? Or was that the main one?
That was the main one. That one and the Jew written by the Jewish character.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Was there any remedial action taken against the author or the illustrator? He
was immediately fired. They said at first they said they were going to suspend him, but the backlash was just so great that they just went ahead and fired him. It's a shame because he's actually a really talented artist. If you've seen any of his other work, I mean, fantastic artist, but he basically said, he said, I apologize for the noise I created. Of course, he didn't apologize for being anti-Semitic, but for causing a noise. So, but he was fired, but more than likely, he'll be picked up again just because, not by Marvel. I think Marvel has cut ties with him, but we'll probably see him like at Dark Horse Comics or Image or somewhere like that.
Right. Yeah.
They love controversy, so.
Sometimes controversy sells, as we can see in the case of Milo Yiannopoulos. Harry, do you think that these messages were allowed to get through by the whole company, or do you think that they're just individual people trying to make statements they happen to get through?
From the statements that I've seen, I assume they were just missed by the editors. Like specifically, whenever they had numbers on shirts referencing like Quranic verses, those, like, if I were to pick up and read the comic, I would have no idea that these are references to the Quran. I guess the one that was obvious, well, maybe a little obvious, was when the Orthodox Jewish character was standing above the jewelry store sign where with their head covering the last letters and just said Jew. Yeah, that one is a little puzzling. I don't know how that, maybe just a a one-off sort of poor editing job that how did that get through. But I feel like it was, I think the author, so to my understanding, the person who wrote it is Indonesian, and a lot of these messages were directed at sort of the current state of affairs in Indonesia politically. I don't follow events there, so it's sort of hard to comment on what is actually happening. But obviously there's some tensions between the Muslims, the Muslims and the Christians. Are there Jews in Indonesia?
Very, very small minority.
Okay. So I mean, to my understanding, the author, he has his opinions of whatever's happening in there, and his sort of messages were, sort of his way of, I suppose, trying to comment on it. I mean, it's possible that the author sort of has an interest in politics, but he works in comics, so he sort of feels like he can get his sort of opinion out. So what I would like to see, it would be sort of Marvel, or rather comic book executives sort of making clear that if they want to comment on politics, they should find another medium to do so, because Marvel Comics, I think, should be it should be a place to tell a story, and if there are some political messages they want to convey, it should actually be related to the story, not like random sort of hidden messages that talk about a completely unrelated political event.
Jacob, would you agree with that evaluation? Or
I do agree. I think that Niff is not the author, he's the artist, and so the artists are kind of at a disadvantage at Marvel, because the writers can put in whatever they want and the artists just have to draw. So I think this was him being like kind of like a radical jihad ninja, I guess. And of course, he's not a radical jihadist, but But I think that he has been very open. It's not like he's a subtle supporter of enforcing Sharia law. He has been very vocal about it, and in fact, this Christian governor who the art was trying to protest, he has said this guy should be punished under blasphemy laws, anti-blasphemy laws. He has said this, so it's not like it's a secret that he was like, everyone knew this. But and also he was, like I said, he was known to put hidden messages in his art. They just had never been so overtly politically.
Right.
So, but yeah, I agree with Harry. I think just Marvel just let it slide. they didn't notice, and it just kind of and I probably the minute it went to the comic book stores is when they realized it. That's why the reaction was so fast, because it was like the next day they were like, oh, we're going to suspend him, and then the next day after that, oh, we're going to fire him. So I mean, the comic book had just been released when it almost hadn't even been in the news. The New York Times hadn't even picked up on it. It was us was covering it, Newsbusters, conservative news. At the time, there was very few people who had the story. So yeah, I honestly think that they did not realize it until it was at the comic book stores.
So one of the things you mentioned in your article is that sales have dropped as a result of political correctness in comic books. You know, like now we're having a female Iron Man, and we're going to have a female Thor, and we're going to have a black Spider-Man, which is all well and good, except for, you know, you're tampering with the characters that people have already come to know and love. Are comic book companies going to be doubling down on these messages, or are they going to actually respond to the market and to make changes?
DC Comics, which publishes Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, when they started doing that and they saw the market go against them, they immediately brought back the old characters. So and what they did was they introduced, so like DC Comics has a storyline called Earth 2, and it's different from the mainstream. And in that one, there is a black Superman, but he's a totally different character. And that I'm actually okay with. I'm okay with them introducing new characters, but the problem that Marvel is facing is I think that they're just wanting to get hip, because right now it seems that they think social justice warriors are hip. Here's the problem, though: social justice warriors don't buy comic books. They don't. They just read the books that their communist professors tell them to read. So I think that, and Marvel kind of had a snarky reply. They said, oh, our readers just don't get diversity. No, it's not about diversity. They like characters like Falcon, who's African-American, Spawn, who's, well, he's not Marvel, but you know, you get my point. It's the fact that they
Black Panther.
Exactly. Black Panthers was the very first black superhero. And it's not like he went away. He has endured. Even when sales were dropping, his was still really high. So it's the fact that they're changing the original characters, like Ironheart is the female Iron Man, and Miles Morales. Now, some people think that Peter Parker has been killed off. That's not true. Peter Parker is still the mainstream Spider-Man. Miles Morales is from a different dimension, and he's come in. But they're both being Spider-Man right now, and that's confusing a lot of people. Well, the animated series actually did the same thing. They brought in Miles Morales, but they gave him a new code name. So even the animated series was like, oh, we know how to fix this. We'll just give him a new code name and go from there. So, but yeah, I think it's the political correctness, just and that Marvel has doubled down for whatever reason right now. DC was smart. DC was like, we're just going to go the other direction. Originals, but Marvel, I don't think they're going to double down until they're really hurt. They're really hurting, and because like even the comic store where I buy my comic books, even the owner is frustrated because it's affecting her business. You know, because people aren't buying comic books because they don't like the stories. So it's I think that is to they'll see comic book stores start dropping them. Because they're wasting money. Why buy comic books no one's going for? So I think that's when it'll happen, and you almost hate it. That's what it's going to come down to: is the comic book stores are going to say thanks, but no thanks.
Now, I used to be a watcher of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and I kind of dropped the show. I also used to be a watcher of Supergirl, and I dropped both shows in part because of the very, very heavy political messaging, especially in the case of Supergirl. It's all Hillary all the time now. The season finale I found of season 2 of Supergirl is called "Nevertheless, She Persisted."
Oh my gosh.
In the case of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they have reconstituted the Nazis, who are basically the Trump supporters, that are going after the Inhumans, who are now the illegal aliens that are being deported, and you know, this and that. They're talking about fake news. I actually went and watched a couple of the episodes, the most recent episodes, and it's like they're parodying themselves. And this is kind of what I'm going to be talking about, or asking Christian when he logs in at the bottom of the hour. But why do you guys think, we'll start with Harry and then go to Jacob, why do you guys think there's so much political targeting of young people and children, even with examples like Zootopia with children? There's so much targeting towards the younger generations. Why would you say that is, Harry?
Well, I think the younger generation is obviously easier to influence than people who are older and already have informed opinions. So I think that's the biggest reason. I think another one is that as it was already mentioned, I think a lot of people just think social justice is hip nowadays, and I think that's sort of another reason. I think that companies are sort of going in that direction, because they sort of see that it's the biggest thing in colleges and schools and even high schools. So they just want to be on the trend, and I suppose that the only thing that'll make them change their mind is when they see their balance sheets. Now, I'm not too sure about DC, but Marvel, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was purchased by Disney. So for that reason, I think it'll be a bit more difficult for Marvel to change course with regards to political correctness, just because Disney is just such a massive company with so much cash flow. I mean, they can afford to sell a few less comics and still double down on the messaging, and it's not going to convince them to sort of shift course and completely jettison PC recasting of characters.
Mm-hmm. Jacob, do you have a similar opinion on why young people are targeted with?
Yes. Harry's is a lot more nicer than mine, because they're actually taking a playbook out of the Nazi playbook. I hate to say that, but like if you look at socialists and how socialists engineered society, their plan was to go after the intellectuals, but we're going to get the smart people to go with communists. But what the Nazis do, Hitler Youth, right? That's what, and exactly what Harry said. They're easier to influence. My nephew, he has this tablet and it has a kid version of YouTube. And there was a villain on one of the videos who had a striking resemblance to Trump. And it was, so right off the bat, it's that way. And Disney purchasing Marvel, that I was kind of excited because I knew, Disney will give us good movies. But exactly what Harry said, one of the problems is now, since Disney had these and Warner Brothers owns DC, Warner Brothers owns Detective Comics, so they're now the movies have the movie executives who are liberal, might be lean more socialist. They're going to have influence on the comic books, and I really think it'll affect it. Well, it already is. It's affecting the writing and just the overall stories. Real quick, here's an example. I don't know if this is one of the most famous book covers ever. They did for a while. Superman ditched Lois Lane, was in love with Wonder Woman. What is Wonder Woman doing? They're supposed to be in love, right? She's wrapping Superman up with her magic lasso. And I know this is a very famous Jim Lee cover. Just such a very subtle feminist message of, and you can interpret that however you want, but it's just even going down in DC, it's just going to be a problem, and they just want to influence the next generation. Fortunately, like you said, Generation Z is actually becoming more conservative, not less.
Okay, so I know Harry has to leave us, unfortunately, but I just wanted to thank you for coming on, Harry, and I definitely hope to have you on an upcoming show. Thank you. I had a lot of fun. So I guess you can catch me on Twitter. Otherwise, I'll be on there at Harry1T6. And I think it's Ben McDonald's birthday today. So yes, we definitely, everybody I will say happy birthday to Ben. Yes. And everyone's favorite Twitter person. All right, okay. Thank you for coming on, Harry. And everybody go and just as a little side note, go and say happy birthday to Ben at BMac0507. And if I don't remember that, then there's something wrong with me. So, all right. So Christian is going to be coming on with us shortly. And here he is. Hello, Christian. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So this is our very special guest today, everyone. He is the editor of HollywoodandToto.com, and he's a movie critic and also a contributor to The Hill. Very glad to have you on today. So we've been talking about political messaging that has been directed at younger audiences, especially. Specifically, I'd like to have you talk about the heavy political messaging that's been inserted into TV shows like Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and DC's Supergirl. Obviously in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. they're talking about fake news, they're talking about the resistance, they're talking about basically anti-Trump messages, and in Supergirl, very pro-Hillary messages. Why do you think that these messages have become so saturated in these shows?
Well, I think Hollywood is obsessed by the election, by the election's results, by politics, and I think they're having a harder and harder time divorcing that from their day job, frankly. And they also realize that pop culture matters more than it used to 10 or 20 years ago, that when a celebrity says something or an actor says something or a favorite character says something, it may resonate in a way that you can't get with a campaign ad or a speech or a policy paper. It's a new world we're living in, and I think that the people in Hollywood, to their credit, frankly, they get that, and they have there's nothing that's holding them back when it comes to putting those messages into their content.
What do you think Hollywood writers and producers hope to accomplish by inserting these messages, especially by targeting children? Do they think that they're actually going to have a short-term effect, or are they looking at the long-term game?
I think any effect. I mean, I think you have a couple of things in play. If you've got the now effect, if there's an election coming up, if you want to kind of increase the people at the marches, you put the messages in now, and then you have an impact. But also, these are the shows that we'll be watching in 5-10 years. So whatever messages are there will linger. I mean, if a movie comes out today and it flops, that movie's going to be on HBO in about 8 months. It's going to be on streaming services in about 3 or 4 months. It'll get out there. So even though the initial burst isn't as successful as they want, that message will still be heard, will still get to the audience. And then it's up to the audience to decide whether they discard it, they appreciate it, they applaud it. And often those messages linger longer than the news, because the news cycle changes every day. And so what we learned about a certain topic today, maybe in a month or 2 months we've forgotten about that, but we just watched that Supergirl episode about, illegal immigration. And that maybe sort of has a different effect.
I actually was one of those people that saw the illegal immigration messaging and all that and said, I'm gonna shut this off. I don't think I want to watch it anymore. Do you think that could have the kind of people being turned off from their messaging is going to have an effect, perhaps if their ratings drop? I know Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has pretty low ratings. Do you think that will end up sending them a message, maybe we should change the kinds of things or the kinds of messages we're putting into our shows? Or do you think they're just going to double down on it?
I think it's kind of a yes and no question. Yes, I think show business does respond to market forces. But by the same token, during the Bush years, when there was every Iraq war film flopped, they kept making them. They had to make about 8 or 10 of them before they finally realized that, hey, maybe these aren't going to be successful. Maybe the audiences aren't there. So I do think there's a sense where the impulse overpowers the sort of the brain. And like a year or two ago, there was a movie, Robert Redford in Truth, about Dan Rather. Now, I mean, who would want to see a movie about Dan Rather, a guy who was basically chased out of journalism, especially one that celebrates him and says, hey, wait, he was right and they were wrong. And of course, we know that isn't true. So, I mean, it didn't take Kreskin to know that was going to flop, and it flopped, but they still put a lot of money into it. So I think at some point they do get the lesson, but I also think it maybe the impulse, the desire is so strong that they'll write the checks anyway. So, and we'll see what happens. I was just thinking this morning that when I was a kid, I used to love Saturday Night Live. It was my favorite show. I'd stay up. I was a little boy and I'd fall asleep sometimes, but I loved the show. I don't care about that show anymore. And if it wasn't for my work responsibilities, I would never watch it. I would never read about it. They've chased me away as a customer forever, because they're so biased, because they're so mean-spirited, because they're so obviously in the tank for the Democrats. So there may be a short-term gain right now where they go, hey, you know what? There's a lot of people who are angry about Trump and they'll tune in. But I think the long term is that they've hurt their brand. And obviously I'm an example of one, but I can't think I'm alone, frankly.
Jacob, I want to make sure you get a chance to ask Christian questions. Do you have any questions for Christian, Jacob?
Yeah. So how should we respond as consumers? Like, I know we can, like Kelly says, we can turn it off, obviously, but it doesn't. They still don't seem to be getting the message. So how do you think, as we, like, I used to love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. As a Marvel comic book reader, obviously, comic book reader, I loved Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it's turning me off. So how do you think that, besides just turning off the channel, is there another way we can say, hey, cut this out?
It's a tough question, and I don't think there's a really great answer. I think you should support content that is either apolitical or maybe even has a right of center message once in a very blue moon. That's a possibility. But also, what I do on Twitter, frankly, is I try to shame people. I try to expose the hypocrisy of what's going on. You've got celebrities who say, you can't blame violence on our movies, even though our movies are very violent, because that's not the way society works. You don't go see a violent movie and then you kill somebody. And there's some sort of truth to that for sure. But at the end of the day, they also want to use their stories to change hearts and minds. Well, which is it? Does the content have no impact on us, or does the content actually influence us in some way and desensitize us in some way and maybe make us see new things in different ways? So I think if you kind of expose those things, I think it could be helpful. And maybe on Twitter, kind of, mock Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, do they really, the resistance, really? I mean, how badly will that episode age in 2 years when, when the culture has moved on? And we'll look back at, it'll be silly, frankly. And I also think just the whole idea of reacting in such a childish way, like a temper tantrum, is silly as well. And I spend half my time mocking Joss Whedon, who I think is a very talented guy. I love some of his movies, but I think some of his actions should be called out. And maybe from a fan who used to love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., maybe he's just pointing it out to other people and saying, boy, that was a silly turn of events. I mean, that takes me right out of the story. Boy, that's not good storytelling. It's not good content. So I think our weapons in a way are sort of culturally limited, but those are some suggestions.
Okay.
So one of the things we were talking about earlier is how so much political messaging, especially in TV and movies, is targeted at children and young adults. I'm kind of famous on Twitter for having reamed Zootopia because of how political I found those messages. I would never show that movie to a child, but I don't know if you have seen that movie, but why do you think that they, especially with those kinds of messages, target children?
Well, and that's how impressionable are they? They're kids. Some of the kids absorb things that they don't even understand they're absorbing. It's just kind of flowing within them in a way, and that becomes maybe they're normal. So I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, I feel like every year HBO has an Earth Day special, and often it has kids there. They've got kids talking about climate change, and that kind of rubs me the wrong way. But if you're a kid watching it, and you see your fellow children, then it kind of has an impact above and beyond seeing Morgan Freeman talk about it. So I think they see it because they feel it's successful. And I suspect on some level it is. I thought Zootopia did a better job. I don't think it was as heavy-handed, even though it was very strong. But I thought the movie was good. It was enjoyable. And I didn't think it overwhelmed things as much, but it can for sure. I mean, Happy Feet talked about climate change at times, and so it's out there, and if you're a filmmaker and you're obsessed with liberal causes, that's what you do. And there's no one going to blow the whistle there. There's no one going to say, hey, this is a kid's movie. We shouldn't really maybe get on a soapbox, should we? There's no conservative voice in that room with enough confidence in himself or herself to make a stand. And that's part of the problem. That's the bubble that the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. creative team is in that bubble. And then no one's going to say, hey, maybe this won't age well. Maybe this will alienate people. Maybe we shouldn't be as heavy-handed. That voice is missing, I would think.
It's almost like they don't think that Trump supporters or even maybe a third-party supporter might watch their show.
Yeah.
They're only catering to one select group of people, and it's almost the disconnect with like, for example, Samantha Bee, who went on TV and is like, I don't care, I only make my show for my certain group of people, and I don't care what anybody else thinks. That's that height of a disconnect. Well, you're never going to expand your audience or win people over if you don't make a gesture towards them. Jacob, did you have any further questions for Christian?
Well, just that because there are conservative filmmakers out there. What would be, but they say that they keep quiet because it not only affects their jobs to speak out. You know, not everyone can be Gary Sinise, right? So because they say if I speak out and then the grip boy does, the grip boy gets kicked out of his union. So how do you think that there's a strategy for conservatives to kind of be a little bit more bolder and without risking, or should they risk their jobs and say, hey, we're conservative filmmakers, we want to make films with our values being expressed? Or do you think it's going to just over time, we'll have to have like a Gamergate-ish circumstance happen? What do you think?
A couple of thoughts. One, it's up to each individual person to speak out or not speak out. I talked to a director who said he makes conservative films. He said the people on his crew, not the stars, the crew, some of them asked to work under a pseudonym because they knew if they were attached to that particular project, it might hurt their career. So that's just kind of a quick example of what's going on. More importantly, there's a couple of things. One, I think conservatives now at this point maybe can kind of work around the system. Maybe they could self-produce. They can kind of go Kickstarter and raise money from like-minded souls. There are ways to kind of avoid the traditional setup where there wasn't available maybe 10, 20 years ago. So there's that. I also think, you know, when Madonna talks politics, it's like at a third grade level. It's very infantile. It's very screechy. And there are some other liberals who actually are very smart, frankly. You know, I think Ben Affleck is very educated, and when he speaks, it's interesting, even if I don't agree. So I think when conservatives in Hollywood speak, I think they should be very careful and do it in a mature fashion and be intelligent and not be divisive and sort of treat it in a much more mature, it's just in a better way. So you can't discount that person, because if John Voight is waving his hands around and with a tinfoil hat, well, then even if I agree with him, he's going to look silly. So I think that people on the right have to kind of play to a higher standard in a way. They have to be smarter, they have to be more sophisticated, they have to be more compelling, and give good arguments, frankly. So if they go that way, they can't be so easily discounted.
So I want to just quick thank Christian for coming on the show. Where can people find you? I think you have a podcast. I'm not sure what the name is. Want to give that a quick shout out on here? People can come and listen to you.
Sure. So the site is hollywoodintoto.com. The podcast is the Hollywood in Toto podcast. It comes out each week. It's on iTunes and Stitcher and pretty much all the major the outlets. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Hollywood in Toto.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, Christian.
My pleasure.
And I know Jacob appreciates it as well.
Absolutely.
All right. So basically, at the end of my show, I like to give shout outs to people on Twitter that I think are interesting or I want people to follow. So I just want to reiterate, Ben McDonald's birthday is today. Follow him at BMAC0507. I want to give my boss a shout out at Ben Shapiro, and also at Conserve Malin she works for The Blaze, and I'm really hoping to have her come on the show in the future, and she's a great follow, so definitely go ahead and follow all those people. Christian, is there anybody you'd like to shout out on Twitter?
Oh gosh, a lot of good people. You know, John Gabriel is always spectacular, funny, sharp, and a great follow. And Red Steeze, Steeze, is I think it's Stephen Miller. He's another great writer. Actually, those two work together on a podcast of their own. But those are two of my favorite guys to follow. So, and then I'm trying to. There's so many people, so many good folks on Twitter. But if you follow them and kind of just check out their sort of little atmosphere of followers, you'll get some good stuff.
Absolutely, Jacob. Is there anybody you'd like to follow, or for people to follow on Twitter?
Yeah, so I'd like to recommend at CN Headlines. That's the Twitter for conservative news. Also follow my friend and colleague at Misty A. Callahan. She's a reporter in Chicago, and she always has something interesting to tweet other than traffic reports. And also, if you're looking for a non-politically correct comic book writer, follow at Bloody Red Baron. That's Mike Barron. I had him on StudioJake, my YouTube channel. He's got some pretty cool comic book characters that you can look into and read. And like I said, he is not politically correct at all. You will enjoy his stuff. Yeah, I second that. He lives in Colorado, as do I, so he's good.
All right, so just one final shout out. Definitely go follow @RealDailyWire. I always forget to shout out the company site, but definitely go and follow @RealDailyWire, as I am the admin of the site. So definitely go and give us a follow there. And I want to thank all my guests for coming on today, and reiterate thank you again to Harry Kachashian for coming on at the top of the hour. And we are going to go off the air.